Greetings, everyone. I'm Rod Jacobs, Director of Development at Native Americans and Philanthropy. I'd like to start by welcoming all of you on behalf of Native Americans and Philanthropy. We are a growing and powerful network of Native and non-Native led nonprofits, tribal nations and communities, foundations, and friends and relatives in the field of philanthropy. This event is part of our member education sessions, where we are holding virtual conversations representing the diversity of Indian country and how philanthropy can operate differently to serve the people, communities, and causes they care about. Today, we're proud to present our third discussion, Equity through Participatory Grantmaking. This discussion will be highlighting the work of Native Voices Rising, a community-led model for equitable philanthropy founded by Common Council Foundation and Native Americans in Philanthropy. Native Voices Rising serves as a mechanism for building broad-based philanthropic support for grassroots groups led by and for Indigenous communities. The work of Native Voices Rising amplifies Indigenous voices and solutions to historic harms and our community's most pressing issues. As we lift these voices, we welcome you to join the conversation by sharing your thoughts, asking questions, and sharing this event with others. Please introduce yourself in the chat as we get started. Now, I'd like to welcome to our broadcast today's moderator, Steph Poston. Welcome, Steph. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much, Rod. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody here in community, even if it's virtual. Everybody, I want to welcome everybody to the Native Americans in Philanthropy third education series. To get us started, we have a powerhouse panel lined up for you today. We're really excited about it. Just a reminder, I'm Steph Poston. I'm from the Pueblo of Sandia, and this is where I'm coming to you live from. So one of the first panelists up is I'd like to invite LorenAshley up. If you can give your name, your organization, and your connection to Native Voices Rising.
Yes, Estongo. My name is LorenAshley. I'm a Yamassee descendant, and I have the honor to be the Training and Resource Development Manager at United National Indian Tribal Youth. We are the largest and oldest nonprofit serving Native youth, and I have had the pleasure to sit on several selection committees for NVR, as well as be a grantee of the program.
Thank you. Joy, you will introduce yourself, please.
Bonjour, everyone. Greetings from the original homelands of Dakota, Ojibwe, Metis people. I live just south of the confluence of the Mississippi and Crow Wing rivers in what you may know as Minnesota. I am the program strategist with Native Voices Rising. I also go back as a grantee when I was at Dream of Wild Health, reviewer, and now working on the supportive assistance program. Greetings, everyone.
Thank you, Joy. Next up, I'd like to have Geneva join us.
Skuyanakoi, everyone. Naknau Geneva Wiki. I am a member of the Yurok tribe in Northern California on the Klamath River and the Redwood Forest. And I'm a senior program manager at the California Endowment, which is a private health foundation. And my relationship with Native Voices Rising is as a funder. So we support both Native Americans in Philanthropy and the Native Voices Rising grant project. And so I'm excited about this conversation and to bring a funder perspective today. Good to see you all.
Thanks, Geneva. Our final panelist is Holly. Holly, if you will join us.
And so I'm involved with NVR through the Grantmaker program, and it was a pleasure to do grant review this year.
Thank you all. So as you can see, we have a powerhouse panel lined up for you. And I will start with my first question to Joy. How did Native Voices Rising originate?
I'm sorry, it kind of lagged there. How did Native Voices originate?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you know, when we all sit around the table and have these conversations about what's going on in our world, and when it comes to the point of connection where Native people are talking to other Native people about what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and most pointedly in this case, the research that was coming out from mainstream councils on foundations for years. And then I believe it was in 2010, First Nations Development Institute produced a research report again that cited that less than 0.1% of large foundation dollars was going into Native communities. And this is something that we've been talking about for years, decades, in fact, since I've been in the field. And as I remember an elder saying, even just recently, if you're having a conversation and you find yourself complaining about the same thing that's been happening over and over again, it might be time to look at how you're participating in that. And I say that as a means to encourage us all to use our voice, because what happened was a conversation was happening between Carly Hare, who was the CEO of Native Americans in Philanthropy at the time, and Ron Rowell, who was a long-term board member of Native Americans in Philanthropy, also served on the San Francisco Foundation as a program officer. He was serving as the first Native CEO of Common Council Foundation. So this was a ripe opportunity for a conversation to go beyond staying in this place of not being happy and growling about what's been happening for decades, to using their voice and their power to take action. So two people in just the right position who had boards that were supportive. And I want to mention also Common Council did not have and does not have an all-Native board. So that means that we had allies on that board that were able to help fund a new research project which looked at why are large foundations not funding in Indian country. And I think the primary examples, as I remember them, is that we can't find them. We don't know any Native people. And if we know them, how do we build trust with them? In fact, maybe the question is, how do we trust them? And then how do we evaluate? And that's philanthropic terms, right? But really the question is, how do we know that they're being successful if we don't have relationship, if we don't trust, if we're not able to communicate? And while this is a common issue across philanthropy about how to reach out to various new and different communities, this is also a prime example of how we could do research to look at what organizations are out there doing work to build power, to raise up community voice, and are led by Native people doing this work. So Louis Delgado, who I want to name and is not with us, but an important powerhouse in Native Americans and philanthropy and research in the field, led a study, a case for funding Native-led change. And between NAP and CCF, this research project was delivered. And by 2013, they had started fundraising and providing grants. It started with 5 donors giving away about $210,000. And this year, we're looking at 70 donors for a total of $3.5 million that will be going out and announced in November. So this is designed to be a proof of concept about how Native-led groups organizing in their own lived experience can be reviewed by Native people who bring that lived experience, the context, the language, the geography, the understanding of what it means to be Native in different areas, different geographies, different cultures, different language, and bring us all together as community organizations and community people to make funding decisions that will impact our communities the most. So that's kind of a beginning capsule of how NVR got started. 10 years later, we're about to release a 10-year report. So I'm sure you all will be looking forward to that by the new year, about the success we've had with this concept about raising funds, but most importantly, getting more money into the community.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. The origination of Native Voices Rising, and so you mentioned a common theme that's a core value to many tribal people, and that's the relationships, right? And we say that a lot, but it really runs deep in tribal communities. So thank you for sharing that. My next question to the other panelists is, how did you first hear about Native Voices Rising, and what is it that made you want to get involved? And I'll direct that to LorenAshley.
Yes, we actually heard of Native Voices Rising through our partners, and it was such an important conversation that we already were seeking funding through other partners, and we, thank goodness, had a referral through one of our youth councils, actually. So we at Unity, we do a lot of work and fundraising for our youth councils. So we have 360 youth councils nationally. And in California, there was a group of tribes who were already members and actually suggested that we join the team. And so from there, we've dove in head first and supported the efforts of NVR wholeheartedly for about 5 years now. So it was a wonderful fit and a wonderful relationship because the values aligned in what we were doing and trying to do grassroots organizing with our youth.
Yeah, no, the youth are such an incredible component of all this effort and this power building effort. So Unity, thanks for the work that you do. We appreciate it out here. I'd like to direct the same question over to Geneva. How did you first hear about Native Voices Rising, and what helped you to get involved?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I love the reminder of the origin story, Joy. Thank you for that. The California Endowment invests in Native Voices Rising for a lot of the same reasons that Joy lifted up. So we are a private health foundation with a commitment on racial equity and recognizing that health and race are interconnected. And our approach to creating health equity in California is really about centering the people most impacted by broken systems, by systems of oppression, and to equip them with the skills and tools to change and influence those systems and policies that affect their health and well-being. And so for us, lots of the themes that have already been named were reasons why this was attractive to us, and why I feel like a pooled fund is attractive to a lot of foundations, or should be attractive to a lot of foundations. So one, the idea that we are we're pooling our resources to allow for Native people to make the grant decisions, to be engaged. Folks like Holly, who I get to be a mentor in the Young Grantmakers program, and delighted to get to see that project through. To be able to have folks like Holly and others engaged in that grant making process is really appealing. And then also that this is an opportunity for maybe some of the smaller grassroots groups that may not be on the radar of a big foundation, may not have the infrastructure to take on a large grant or the time and capacity to develop relationships with foundation folks who are kind of, can be tricky and elusive to figure out how to connect with. And that then they're on the radar screen, right? So for us to be able to see the list of grantee partners who come from the Native Voices Rising, including those who apply and don't get funded, is another connection and a set of information that we can then look at to think about how might we, potentially partner or build a relationship with other folks. And for the California Endowment, I think like a lot of large foundations, we don't have open requests for proposals or open application processes because we have such a clear theory of change and grant making strategy, and we don't want to waste people's time, right? Having them fill out applications when we, want to be in a different kind of relationship with partners, and so a pooled fund like this is also an opportunity to potentially get to know different partners in different ways and organizations in different ways that hopefully creates the minimum amount of work for partners and put the really places the burden then on us as the foundation rather than on our small grassroots groups or our youth groups and others.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really love the new perspective on how you really try to be inclusive and really remove all the barriers for people to access the resource. So, and really doing it with intention. So thank you for that. Holly, what is it how did you first hear about Native Voices Rising?
So I'm involved with Native Voices Rising through the Native Youth Grantmakers program. And so NAP started the Native Youth Grantmakers program, I think this year. I think we're the first set of youth to be part of it. And it's been a really exciting program because it's part of leadership building. And it strengthened me like culturally, of being more culturally grounded and understanding where our tribe is at as far as how are we involved with philanthropy, what kind of grants are we getting, and kind of asking more questions about how can we be more involved in philanthropy and what potential that has for us. And so with NVR, they partnered with the program and I got to do grant reviewing with them. And we did that just in October. I think we just did our grant reviews and it was a really amazing process. It's not something I ever would have thought I would be part of. And it was really amazing to see all the different projects people were doing and to look at these applications and how they communicated who they were and those values. And Geneva mentioned Geneva works with me. Geneva is my mentor for the program. She's also my cousin. So it's very helpful and looking deeper into things for our tribal community and also our family history and different things like that. So it's been amazing working with her and being part of the process of grant making with NVR.
Great. I will second that, Holly. You really do have a rock star mentor. Just can't say enough great things about Geneva. She's just amazing. I want to do a follow-up question with you, Holly, about, we have two youth, you as a youth, and then also Unity. So there's that, people are taking notice and really wanting to be inclusive of how we include the youth. Why do you think it's important? What is that perspective for the youth to be involved in that grant making process?
It's so important to have youth involved because part of it is the leadership capacity in building. And I've been part of different leadership opportunities. And I think talking about leadership, youth leadership opportunities generally for a minute, we're experiencing the same issues and the same challenges in our community. And so being involved with it gives us an outlet for our passions. You're able to say, this is something that I'm very concerned about, something I want to work on. And then now you have a place where you have mentors and people that can help build you up. So you're being more grounded and understanding your values of your community, being culturally grounded. And it's just so important to invest in youth in that way. And sorry, I'm referencing my notes for a minute because I want to make sure I touch on the things I want to touch on. But it's just so important because we talk about in Native communities looking 7 generations ahead. And so we're part of those 7 generations. And if we want to be investing our communities, it's having us part of these solutions. And it can be very intimidating hearing something like philanthropy and then being like, oh yeah, do you want to be involved? So having a process where people are helping you understand it and I can ask questions and they're very open to answering my questions is really important. It's really helpful. And so it's very important to have us part of those processes and teaching us good stewardship, because that is a lot of Indigenous values that we talk about, is that stewardship and the different values I have and the different ways of doing things. And one thing I really connected with NVR was when we first met them, our trip in Albuquerque, we talked about honoring our way of being. And part of honoring our way of being is connecting through generations, that generational connection. And we always talk about interconnectedness and understanding our our impact and what we can do in our lives. So if you want strong leaders, we need to build up these strong values and help us understand who we are and where we come from. And then to apply it specifically to grant making, it's now saying that I'm passionate about this problem. If it's food sovereignty and want to run a specific program like that, or you want to get involved with specific things, part of that is funding and being able to make sure that this program can happen. And being able to have funding and a long-term funded program means that it can improve over time and that this can create long-term change. So I think that it's really nice as a youth to get involved with something like this, to feel strengthen myself personally and what I can do in the future, and maybe what I'm even doing now, being involved with the grant making process. I felt like I was actually part of something that was making a big change. Because as I mentioned, I've been part of other youth leadership programs before, and we didn't have the capacity to do long-term change. It was like an event, which is nice, but to be part of something, has a bigger impact and long-term impact. It was really special. I know we use the word empowering a lot, but it really was empowering to see a lot of the different projects going on, reading the grants, and it just made me feel so much more empowered. Like there's a lot of good work happening all over the place. There's a lot of people that are really strong leaders, and we keep building our strong leaders, and we get to see these really amazing projects going on and being able to fund them and say, yes, we want to give them money. We want to see them succeed. It was really great to do that. So I think that's what it's meant to me, being part of this and being part of these processes, because we talk a lot about the struggles our communities face and how we have a hard time with it. So part of that, as Joy mentioned, it's not just complaining like it's this thing and this thing. It's now being part of that healing is what it feels like, that we're in this healing process, these programs that are building up, that are part of language revitalization, that are part of building equity in our communities.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And, we always worry, for future generations, and you just made me feel so confident that we're in good hands. I love that you just really resonated with the comment of honoring our way of being. I mean, that just resonated with me. So thank you for all your words. And I just feel that you're well on your way to being an amazing leader. So thank you for your contributions and your words in responding to that question. So I want to look at a question from the audience that came from Phillips Jalen. And I think we got it right, but it's on credit issues when people are trying to tap into resources. And that, as one of the co-founders of Native Women Lead, we have a matriarch loan fund that we don't do credit checks, right? So we give people opportunities to access resources and set up the loan process or the grant making process on our terms that make sense and meet our community where they're at. So the question, I think that we're going in the right direction. The struggle is real. My question is, where is the second chance project program that can support organizations, people that are held back given credit situations? Maybe Geneva, do you have some insight for that?
I wish I did. I don't. That's really outside of the scope of our work, unfortunately. So I can talk about, sort of like nonprofit finance fund. If you had a nonprofit question around, nonprofit sustainability or organizational management or financial management, but I don't know. I'm not in that space for personal credit. Steph, I feel like you had a better answer.
Yeah, I will say that during the pandemic, as one of the co-founders of Native Women Lead and all the staff working on it, it was like we realized that Native people don't typically have access to resources, haven't had a reason to build credit, so the credit scores hold them back. And that was one of the reasons for our entrepreneurs that we lent or made grants not based on credit, but based on character. And so that was a different way to look at things. And I can share more about that, or we can put it in the chat about where to access that fund. But appreciate the question. I don't know if anybody else from the panel might have something to add or add clarity to the question from Phillips Jalen. Okay, that was a very good question. The next one is, what are some of the gaps you've seen in the grant process for Native groups outside of of NVR, and what has NVR done to address some of those things in general? And we'll start with Joy on that one.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's I'm trying to stand back over 30 years of my career in philanthropy and provide a question that's relevant to today, which is why I so prefer to hear from our young people about what's happening today. But I would say in the arc of my reflection is that traditionally, I don't mean Native traditionally, I mean philanthropy traditionally has not had Native people at the table. And that is the biggest difference, is that our voices are heard, that we mentor each other into helping our voices be heard, how to speak in these settings where there are wealthy people or individuals that come from different life ways than ours. So I think that access to our voices and our knowledge and our history is the most critical shift that I'm seeing emerge, that we're at board tables, that we're in staff representation, and for NVR, that representation of Native people across, for us, the United States, Hawaii, Alaska, and often crosses over into the border south and north, that all of these individuals are involved in the grant making process, which includes the receiving and the making of decisions. So whenever we have access to people outside of our community or our body of work, we have more information to share. For those who in the past could not see us or could not hear us or did not know we exist, we are a larger movement within philanthropy to create change. So I think we're filling big gaps and we have a lot to go.
Yeah, great response. The gaps are huge, but I mean, with the youth that are involved, I think we're on our way to closing some of those gaps and really giving access. So I would like to have LorenAshley answer that question. What are some of the gaps that you've seen in grant making, and how can we address that?
Yes, thank you. I think this is one of the pivotal shifts that we've seen. When we, as one of the oldest nonprofits for serving Native youth, over the years, we've had to compete in various arenas for funding to help support the grassroots efforts on the ground for our Native youth. And typically what we see is in any case that works with youth is, you have a grant writer, you have somebody who can speak the language and knows the ins and outs, and then they go and seek funding, and the youth really don't get a say in the process or don't find out about this grant until after it's already funded. And what I think is so unique to Native Americans in philanthropy and how Unity operates is that youth are at the table and involved from the very beginning. For those of you who don't know, Unity actually has youth that are on every level of decision making, whether it's at our board of directors, whether it's with our different staff meetings, even knowing which funders we participate with. Unity will take a grant before the National Council of the National Unity Council. And so that's voting members of all the different youth tribal representations across the nation. And we actually ask the youth permission before entering into different grants. And what that does is, instead of getting a funding opportunity and then later having to turn around and collect community buy-in, if you include your community and the people that you serve from the very beginning, it is a completely different conversation. And that's what, we have found when we partner with Native Voices Rising, is exactly what was mentioned previously. They honor our relationships and how we are how we do things and the way of our being and being holistic in our approach and really valuing what the community says and involving the community in your decision-making process. As a reviewer, I've really seen how, we take notice. We ask, how did your community weigh in and how did you come about this decision making? Is it just your board or did you involve local community people? Have you done, town halls? It's just the process that is Indigenous, honestly. It's taking our Indigenous values of being community-based and letting all of the voices be a deciding factor, including those of youth, and making sure that there's space at the table for everyone when you enter into partnerships and receive grant funding. So you're not always chasing the funding and then adjusting and telling your youth, okay, we're going to do this. It's letting them be a part of that conversation from the very beginning and asking them, what are your needs and how can we address that with our partners who value what you have to say? So it's a huge gap that I think is a movement and a model for future generations.
I really appreciate that whole active engagement with the youth. I mean, true active engagement. I work with lots of organizations and a lot of people have great ideas. And when I often ask them the question, so what do your stakeholders want? Right? That's often like a misstep. So I love that you all take real intentional step about a process that is very Indigenous. So congratulations on that effort. Geneva, what are some of the gaps that you see out there and how is MVR helping to address those?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Joy, I feel like you spoke to a lot of this in your opening remarks about the intention of Native Voices Rising in the beginning, and just want to lift up and echo a lot of those same sentiments about the gaps that the program is filling, and just to say we have increased the number of Native people in philanthropy and serving in grant making roles and on boards, and we have a long way to go. So Joy and I are probably 25 people, Native people in mainstream philanthropy across the country. And in just my 7 years at the California Endowment, we've been able to see a huge increase in the amount of funding, but also the number of tribal partners we have. And that's just about everything that we've talked about relationships, about already getting to sort of skip towards some trust because we know where we come from, and knowing how to make those connections maybe more quickly than folks who are not part of the tribal communities. And so just to say, I know it makes a difference because I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. I've lived it. And so for any foundation folks who are on the call, if you don't have a Native person in a grant making role or on your board, we have a list. We have a list of qualified folks that we can send your way today. And we encourage you to make that commitment to have more Native folks represented in decision-making places, because it will only enhance your work, we promise. So that's one. The other I would say is when I ask foundations, who I feel like a lot of foundations, especially anybody who's on this call, is interested in increasing your relationships and partnerships with tribal communities, right? And often when we ask what's in your way, it'll be both the I don't know Native people or how to connect, to I don't know how to ensure to build a relationship built on trust, where both the foundation can trust the tribal partner or the tribal partners can trust the foundations. And then the third is, I think folks are often conscious of their unconsciousness about tribal politics. They know it's complicated, but they don't know how, or they don't know how to navigate, and they don't want to be the kingmaker or the decision maker. They don't want to get in the messy bit. And so part of what Native Voices Rising does is provide a really safe, clean, easy kind of step in that direction, where you can, make a grant to a pooled fund and then trust that Native people will be making the decisions about where their grant goes. And, brilliant Native people who you're meeting on this call are making those really thoughtful decisions. So it's also I think, kind of a path of least resistance that really hits a lot of the kind of gaps or obstacles that foundations often find themselves in, preventing them from deeply investing in tribal communities.
Wow, I loved your call to action, right? It was, how, if you're looking for that connection, is to, if you're a foundation and you need it's important to have natives at the table, that you have that list. So if there's one takeaway, that's a big one, that Geneva's already started to create that list. So thank you for that. Holly, I just want to let you answer this question about the gaps. What have you seen in the grant making process, and what has NVR done to address it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was really thinking about how we talk about the 4 R's. And so that was one of the first things. So Brittany's the one that is in charge of this Native Youth Program. So the first things we talked about was the 4 R's, which is relationships, respect, reciprocity, and redistribution. And that's a huge part of things. And I think that when I was talking with Geneva, and like Geneva being my mentor, she sent me a lot of great different resources, and I was reading over them and looking at them. A lot of long-term change comes from relationships and building that connection with those funders and building that trust. So I feel like NVR focusing on building these relationships with Native people, reviewing these things, and it's been mentioned before how we kind of have these little experiences, so we already understand. So these, within the grants, I saw people explaining their values and explaining who they are. That was helpful to me because I wasn't as familiar with them. But at the same time, some of the things they say, you relate to that because you live that. So you understand it. So it's not these gaps of understanding where you might have different impressions, I guess, of what who Native American people are. You live it, so you know to an extent what they're going through, and then they explain that to you. So part of addressing those gaps was those relationships and building that strong foundation with things. So it is important to build those. If you want to commit to long-term change, it's important to build those relationships and be conscious of that. Intentionality is another really strong Indigenous value. Really look at the intention and the way that you do something. That's just so important.
Wow. I the core value pieces and what that means to us as Indigenous people carries in all the work that we do. And I love that you know about the 4 R's and that you can say them. So thank you for that. I'm going to take a question from the audience, and that came from Jessica Ward. What are ways people interested in gaining grant-making philanthropic experience in the Los Angeles, California area for urban natives in Los Angeles, Tongaland? Where can they get that professional experience? And let me ping Geneva, since she's closest to that area, I think, but let's start there. And if anybody else wants to chime in, it'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it would be, there's lots of different answers depending on your professional experience and background and where you're at in your career. So the first thing to say is the California Endowment will have several positions grant making positions coming open in the next few months. And so if you're in that place of your career where you're ready to actually step into a philanthropic role, I would say please keep your eyes peeled to TCE. So that's one. And then there are a handful of fellowships that can, if you're not quite at the place to make a career jump, but want to get some experience. So one is obviously the program that Holly is involved with. So Native Americans in Philanthropy's youth grant making program, I think, is it's ideal way to dip your toe and get some really well-rounded experience and get a connection to a big network, right? And experiences like Holly being in this webinar. So that's one. There's also the Greenlining Institute has a fellowship that the California Endowment has partnered with them over the years, and we've hired lots of folks who have come through that fellowship. So there are others. I know NAP has some other fellowships as well to look into. if that's also seems like too big of a commitment and you want to just like do a toe dip, often the local community foundations will have a community grant review for, say, their holiday grant making program or some grant round. And that would be one that would be an easy phone call to make to with the local community foundation, or a smaller foundation, or even like Liberty Hill Foundation is a community driven funder in LA. That would be another one we would recommend to contact, and just to see if there are any sort of community opportunities for community folks to get involved in the actual like grant review process. And then the last one I would say, as a former nonprofit school leader and tribal leader, if you've got skills in grant writing and grant review, editing, any of those sorts of pieces, and want to actually get grant writing experience, or kind of develop that relationship or get exposure to what grant making looks like, volunteer your time, call up your local nonprofits. There are a ton in LA, which you're lucky to do, and ask if there's a way that you might get involved and support some of those local grassroots groups, including helping them write their Native Voices Rising grant application as an example, because folks always need additional help in those spaces if that's also part of your skill set. But I'm excited to hear other ideas from my colleagues.
Yeah, I like others to chime in about that question about resources for professional development even outside the California area, right? Does anybody have any of the other panelists have suggestions? Joy?
Oh, I think LorenAshley was going to say something.
Okay, come on, Loren.
Yes, I just wanted to, again, I would, Native Voices Rising provided an amazing opportunity, not only as a grantee, but, they took it a step further where they would actually partner you with a consultant in an area for capacity building. And for so many Native organizations, capacity building is, a major thing, especially if a lot of nonprofits put out the majority of their funding towards direct services to their community. And I just thought it was an innovative approach to, connect, and going back to those R's, right? Building relationships with those that are already in our community who understand your values and roles. So we had the opportunity to be partnered with another Indigenous person who had a skill set of need. For example, it could have been anything from grant writing to helping us strengthen our grants, to in previous years, we also connected with accounting and bookkeepers, and they were able to do that match for a certain amount of hours. And so I think if you are ever in a position to give, it can be in-kind resources as a contractor. If you have this knowledge, it is knowledge that needs to be shared with the other communities. And I think that was an innovative approach, that it's not just funding, but it's knowledge sharing and, learning from each other, and just taking time to share what we've learned over the years to make sure we're lifting up others and along the way. So it's not just us succeeding, but it's our community as well.
Yeah, great. Anybody else? Lots of great ideas and pointing to a lot of great resources. Anybody else want to add to that question from the audience?
I just wanted to, add and reiterate what Geneva said about local foundations that are in your area, local nonprofits that are in your area. LorenAshley, thank you for lifting up what NVR does in terms of the supportive assistance. It's a gap that we try to fill. And also it's this beautiful opportunity where we're bringing some Native entrepreneurs that are leaning into consulting and their specialty. They want to bring that into the Native community, and we're able to connect you in ways that I think, if you can think of this as being curious about what are those people doing at that foundation, and to just give them a call and ask how you can be engaged, is a perfect way to think about this. There are, in many of the larger cities around the United States, there are philanthropic institutions that focused on community-based grant making. So I would seek those out if you're in any of those large cities. In Minneapolis, we also have the Tuahe Foundation, which is Native formed, led, and funded, and they're working on, have a large endowment, still working on that. While they re-grant, they use community members to help with that re-granting process. They also have a leadership program. So there's so many ways you can involve. I would just encourage you to go get really curious.
I love that. Get curious, right? That always sparks interest and opens new doors. We have an amazingly active audience, so I want to make sure I'm covering all of that. So here's another audience question from AMBC. I think I got that right. I'm on the board of a community foundation in Colorado. Do you have any best practices you can share for measuring impact that are more culturally aligned with tribal people and organizations? That's a really great question. And I'm going to ask LorenAshley. Can you speak to that?
Yes, this is actually my absolute favorite part of grant making process, is hearing from people how to measure it best. So one really Indigenous approach is obviously, you know, a lot of funders, they want to hear the qualitative, the numbers, how many people did you reach? But we know in Indian country, there is so much to a story besides numbers. And one thing that I really appreciate from Native Voices Rising is the idea to include our Indigenous thought process and how we measure success, because it may not always be numbers. You may be dealing with a tribe or community who there are only a couple of hundred tribal members. And so their success is just as meaningful as somebody who is, you know, reaching nationwide. So it's not always about the numbers. So going into qualitative, how do you measure success in an Indigenous way? I would say talking circles are a traditional form of, or healing circles. That's the traditional form of a focus group. The Native Voices Rising also was very open to the idea of measuring success through storytelling. Traditionally, Indigenous people were creators of their histories and oral preservation of how things impacted them. And so to not only be counting numbers, but to incorporate digital storytelling, interviews with your the people that you're funding, you know, invite them to have a conversation and include people. You can document those and those conversations, but to really invite elders from the community or community members or stakeholders to have that digital, you know, either storytelling or conversations as a way to measure the success orally versus, you know, and that could be as simple as setting up phone call conversations and asking those questions on a deeper level. And you will get so much more information about how the program actually impacted lives and had a lasting effect versus having a paper. I can tell you from experience, I have been on every spectrum of grants where I was at powwows, you know, selling fry bread tickets for people who filled out paper surveys just to get those numbers for a state or a federal grant. And then I've been on the other end where I was engaged in foundations who truly understood the importance of relationship building and hearing the oral history of our people. And we've actually done things even through art. We did with youth, they could paint how on a giant mural, how things made them feel, what things they'll be taking away, just tapping into their expression and knowing that there's more to success than numbers. So I just thank Native Voices Rising, because even as a grantee, they've adopted those implementations and how to measure our successes. So yes, to just think outside the box and engage in your tribal communities and see what is the best way they feel that you could really get the community feedback.
Wow, some great insight, and just you could tell your real life experience on the ground with how you try to engage and get people connected to the initiative at hand. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to add to that question from our audience about best practices for measuring impact?
I mean, that was the perfect answer. I think you nailed it. The only piece I would just like sort of like double click on would to be say like ask the partner, ask your grantee. What are you curious about learning about? How are you going to measure success? How will you know? What are the learning questions that you're holding that we can write along and learn with you? And ask up front for them to define it for themselves. And everyone doing good community work has a vision of success, right? And they're holding deep questions about how are we going to get there and how will we know when we're there? And so lean on the wisdom inherent in the people doing the work.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing too is a matter of just that consistency of showing up. That I was speaking to a group I was working with, and it's like, how do we engage community? And it's like being consistent, even if one person shows up, and then the next time 2 people. But that consistency in Indian country, in our Indigenous population, where we just serve the people at hand and not really rely on the big numbers that make impact, because we know those people go home to their back to their communities, back to their families, and really bring that positive impact. So I'd like for us to move on to the next question, which is what have been the particular practices or opportunities where Native Voices Rising has really changed the idea of how philanthropy should operate? And so, Holly, if we could have you add to that.
I think it's kind of unique. Like, I thought about it for a minute, and just being able to engage in different conversations with people over the course of the program. I've met different people of a variety of different experiences in philanthropy. I was like, it might be unique for me to come into philanthropy from a Native perspective, from Indigenous worldview, to come here where the first thing we're talking about is what are our core values and how are we operating. And even throughout the review process for NVR, it was about how is it tying back to NVR's values? And that's part of how we are evaluating things and looking at, when we're just talking now, how are we measuring success, talking about what does success look like to them and trying to understand their community in that whole bit. So I think it's been interesting coming into it from a Native perspective, and it makes me curious what it's like not operating within the Indigenous perspectives and the way that things work in that capacity. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to digest that one a little bit more, just thinking on it.
No worries.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Joy, what are you thinking about? What have been the particular practices or opportunities where NVR has really changed the idea of how philanthropy should operate, should show up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm happy to ask. It actually reminds me of a small book I have on my bookshelf that Wilma Mankiller helped to lead, called "Context is Everything." It's been my Bible since she released it, and I came to Native Americans and Philanthropy. And I think it is that example that we bring to the grant making process, that NVR has engaged community people to create the container, the context for understanding. It reflects back to all the questions that have been asked. I think about the evaluation question. When you understand the context that you're evaluating, your evaluation shifts drastically. It helps you to reflect back on your own to evaluate yourself before evaluating others. I would say how you're doing is always a good question to ask. And what if we ask that of ourselves in philanthropy first, and then we go ask our community members how you're doing? And I know that what that creates is an environment where we can talk about our strengths and we can talk about our power in a way that is also humble. And some of the strongest organizing emerges based out of a kitchen table. based out of what some may call second chance, but it's the context of what we're coming from that creates a power to create a shift. And I think NVR is just all about more than empowering to create the environment out of philanthropy with community that will create these shifts and changes.
Wow, that was powerful. I mean, that simple question of how are we doing from every level, right, is a very simple question, but can be so insightful. Yeah, thanks for that. LorenAshley, what practices where NVR has really changed the idea of how philanthropy should operate?
I think it's a unique opportunity, and it kind of ties in to how we can further grow and evolve. But just to honor the simple fact that Indigenous organizing and movement building is older and has been around longer than the idea of a Western concept of philanthropy. And just to be honoring our processes, and that to know that there is a unique opportunity to learn from these Indigenous methodologies and approaches to really movement building to create real change. We've seen this in so many different platforms, whether it's environmental protection or it is areas for even political movements and shifting entire voting communities. I believe that what NVR is doing and really changing the idea of philanthropy is, yes, it's Indigenous based and Indigenous concepts, and including those wisdom carriers from the community and grassroots level, and bringing them up to the table to say that you know your community better than anyone. But I do believe this is an opportunity for, philanthropy to grow and really see how NVR is shifting the focus. And I believe a lot of non-Native communities and organizations could learn a lot from NVR and their approach to community-based movement building, and really honoring those who are taking those shifts and really those people on the ground, and bringing them to the boardrooms and making a seat for them in the decision-making process, and just honoring the unique perspectives of each community and how, we've been around since dirt, right? So I believe that these values are more than just a list on your mission statement, but it can be practiced in who you're inviting to the table and who you choose to share your opportunities with. So I just think NVR, hopefully this is an opportunity to teach others our amazing approaches. So I think it's really shifting.
Yeah, thanks so much, LorenAshley. Geneva, what are your thoughts on this question about?
I agree. LorenAshley said everything. Double click on everything, and let me just also sort of underline the piece around, so often philanthropy, especially historically, has taken such a, really perpetuated colonialism and patriarchy and so many ways. And so the idea that like Native Voices Rising isn't giving grants to make people more comfortable navigating broken systems, right? NVR is giving grants to the people who are holding the Indigenous knowledge, just all the things LorenAshley just said, to literally dismantle those systems, to confront the systems that have been built on white supremacy, to literally eradicate us as people, and to then reimagine and rebuild those systems, to really shift that power to create the kind of, values-driven world that we know is the true state of Native communities, which is whole and healthy and loving, and so it's a different way of resourcing, and it's a different set of priorities, to not just maintain status quo or to navigate the status quo better, but to absolutely reimagine the status quo based on our Indigenous values and wisdom. So thank you for lifting all of that up.
Yeah, that was awesome. So we're going to start with you on this next question, Geneva. On the flip side, where are opportunities to further grow and evolve NVR's work to better meet the needs of communities that NVR is trying to support?
Yeah, well, and hopefully everybody heard all of the, incredible technical assistance and capacity building and relationship development and networking and leadership development that's built in, right? And that cannot be underestimated. And so I want to just really make sure that was really clear. I think a few others. Forever, always, there's the need to uplift and tell the stories and share the stories of our folks on the ground doing incredible work, changing their communities and really leading, really healing our communities, healing the nation. And so any, more opportunities to uplift those stories and to name the names of the organizations and put those front and center feels really important. And then I think the others, just the continued education of foundations and the connection between donors and funders and community directly, and the ability to form those. And then just again to lift up the opportunities like the Native Youth Grantmaker program and other ways to engage other folks, to make the tent bigger of folks who can be engaged in the work.
Thank you. Holly, what are your thoughts on the flip side? Where are the opportunities to further grow and evolve Native NVR's work to better meet the needs of communities?
Yeah, Geneva pretty much touched on what I wanted to say about it, was making sure you're uplifting these communities, because we've talked about that a lot. So it's making sure that's in practice and make sure we are looking at them and upholding them for the knowledge that they do have. I think oftentimes the misconception about Indigenous communities is that we don't have knowledge, and there is a lot of strong knowledge there. We talk about knowledge keepers all the time. So yeah, making sure that we're really uplifting them, because their success is our success. And that's why I felt empowered reading those grants, because I feel like seeing the success of other Native people, it just feels good. You're just happy to see that. Yeah, and it is amazing that NVR has those resources and making sure that those are accessible to people. And I'm not sure if there's a place for them to get feedback from those resources, if there's any way for that. I'm not as familiar if there is a way to get feedback, but it is important to hear from the people who are engaging with that to make sure that it is serving them the best way possible. Yeah, so just making sure that we're really highlighting those things and highlighting the knowledge that is there and really encouraging.
Great. LorenAshley, how about what?
Yes, I feel like everything that my constituent has said, I like her double clicks, right? We're double clicking on each other, but it's because when we say those on the ground, funders are, reciprocity, the idea of giving back. And if you have been blessed with resources and opportunities and even knowledge, it is our Indigenous responsibility to share that with others, so that when one succeeds, all of us succeed. And I think that model is not just ideal, but I would really like to challenge any funders that are out there. Anybody can help create a structure that is successful around participatory grant making. And that is really a challenge to not do things just the way that they've always been done, but to know there are models and successful organizations and foundations that are based on these values and that you can operate differently. So just, furthering, evolving NVR's work to help teach other foundations how to embrace these Indigenous concepts, so that we don't just keep going with the cookie cutter ideas of how things should be, but that there is a better way to operate.
Great, thank you. Joy?
Yeah, thank you for that. I've been listening intently to all the feedback that the panelists are providing, and I'm always listening for how we can improve at NVR. So I appreciate all of that feedback. And I want to say that one thing that NVR is doing is we've been working on an advisory council, and that will be formally meeting in January of 2023. And this is just another iteration of NVR extending its arms around and with community, that there are many kinds of philanthropy out there. It comes in many forms. Geneva's talked about the form that she represents. NVR is another form. And so we're really trying to blow this community-based, community-driven philanthropy out of the water so it really can be seen and celebrated. And let's have fireworks and ceremony and dances and food and giveaway, right? Let's give away a lot of money. But the intent is that this advisory council comes from many geographies, many native cultures, and many generations, so that we can fuel and feed each other and grow this grant making pool. And more than that, we can grow leaders who can be engaged in philanthropy in many different ways. I think all of you have referred to the ways that you've approached it. It can be on staff of the foundation. It can be on a board. It can be a volunteer. And when I say a reviewer or an advisory council member with Native Voices Rising, I'm not saying as a volunteer. Those are all paid positions, shall we say. We pay our people. We pay our Native community to provide this expertise. And in no way does that pay equal the wisdom that they bring. But collectively, we're trying to really bring that together and have an impact in community and on philanthropy.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm just doing a time check, and so we're going to start to wrap up and give some closing remarks from our panelists. So you all have the closing word here. Speaking to funders that largely want to support Native efforts, what would the one thing you would want the funders who are listening to this to leave with? And I'll start with Holly.
Well, we're talking a lot more recently about wanting to move towards equity and looking at equity building and working with Native people, having them involved, present in what you're doing and this kind of work. We're building an Indigenous toolkit, and that is to address the colonial toolkit and all these different systems that was mentioned here. And I just want to say that if you're looking to work with these communities, we're looking for these relationships and this reciprocity. And there's a lot to offer from these communities. They have a lot of knowledge, very intelligent people. And it's something my grandma says, and I always think about it. And she says, we're the first ones at the table and we're the last to leave. So we're looking for people to join us at that table and be part of these projects to create this change.
Thank you. Thank you. LorenAshley?
Yes, everything that's been shared today is really a meaningful, pathway to, really address your next cycle of funding. And I would just really encourage our funders to invest in Indian country, but do it systematically and take time to learn about the different foundations like Native Americans in Philanthropy, who do have a really broad scope of Indian country. And it's whatever funding is able to support Indigenous efforts is amazing. But I just want to reiterate the opportunities that Native Americans in Philanthropy open up to so many different communities that funders may never hear about or know. And so if you're interested in really investing in Indigenous communities versus trying to go and figure it out for yourself, come to an organization like NVR who has those community connections and that network, who can help redistribute your funding to make sure that it makes the most impact on communities. So that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. Geneva?
Yeah, all of that, and there's also a list of all of the grantee partners from Native Voices Rising. So if you have like the California Endowment we fund in California, for instance, if you have other kinds of geographic or other kind of limitations on how you fund, you can sort and call Joy or Natives in Philanthropy to make some introductions. If you're in California, call me. and we can go through, we can have a conversation about your priorities and goals and help make connections and build relationships. So if this is work that is new to your organization, there are lots of resources available to help you navigate both the internal learning that will have to happen, and then the relationship development with folks on the ground. Because as LorenAshley said, we want to do this in a good way. And I was with some corporate funders a few weeks ago, and they said that some tribal communities are not even taking their money because the values are not aligned, right? And so to have to be able to have others support you in navigating those kinds of conversations about what that might look like and how you might show up in a better way, in a good way. There are lots of resources to help you do that, and count everyone on this call as part of your team to help you achieve that goal.
Yeah, thanks. Joy?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and double click on what everyone said. Fantastic ideas and fantastic panel. I guess I would just reiterate that you can do this. You can. I serve as a leadership coach also, and we get in our own way all the time. So I think it's about exercising muscle, perhaps, that you may be not as comfortable exercising. Sometimes when we go out and do something new and we exercise a new muscle, we know it's going to hurt a little bit, and it's also going to feel really good for doing the right thing, for aligning your values to the work. So I just encourage you to use your voice, exercise those muscles. You can do it. And we're all here as a resource. Absolutely. Yeah. Let me know how I can be helpful.
So, and we have had an active audience. So the one final question I'd like to answer from the audience is, where can we learn more about and this came from Carcis. Where can we learn more about foundations that embrace the participatory grant making models? If anybody can just sort of jump in here. Is there...
I can jump, but what I would say is Google your way to heaven. I mean, Google is your friend. I did that recently, looking for participatory grant makers beyond the ones that I know. And it's something really easy to find, and then call someone and ask who else they know. So network yourself. Yeah.
I love that response. Yes. Google is our friend, right? Thank you so much. Each of these panelists, I'm inspired by you today. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your reciprocity to our tribal communities, to our Indigenous communities. Holly, I wish you everything you need to continue to be the strong leader you already are. So thank you so much. We really appreciate this. I'd like to turn it back over to Rod to close us out here.
Steph and the panelists, and thank you to all who joined today. We are so proud of the work being accomplished through this partnership. And as we near our 10th anniversary, $10 million campaign, we'd like to focus on deepening the partnership of Native Voices Rising, whether that is through increasing commitment or learning more about NVR's work. Today's discussion, we talked about NVR being this proof of concept. Well, it's been proven 10 years in the making. So we are asking you to please consider making a grant to help contribute to this campaign, or reach out to our staff to learn more about NVR. Please visit nativevoicesrising.org for more information. Remember, following today's broadcast, you're going to be receiving an evaluation. Please take the time to share your thoughts. It only takes about 3 minutes. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it helps us shape our member education sessions. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month for a discussion on moving philanthropy beyond land acknowledgements.